Great. So thank you all for being here tonight. First of all, I would like to ask everyone to mute yourself if it's not already done. And just for legal reasons, I have to tell you that this presentation will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel later. Quickly, before we start with Roman, I would like to introduce myself and the Innovation Club. My name is Jan Costa. I'm 25 years old, and I'm currently finishing my master's degree in the University of Fribourg. But most importantly, I'm in charge of the Innovation Club. For those who don't know what the Innovation Club is, I like to make the following analogy. So if entrepreneurship was a tunnel, the Innovation Club would be the entrance of this tunnel for all students in Fribourg who are curious about entrepreneurship or innovation. It doesn't matter where you're from or what you study or what's your background. We're here to inspire you, to teach you, and to connect you to a network of people with the same interests. We do this mostly by organizing events with inspiring people like Roman, who's with us tonight, but also by giving workshops and supporting students who want to take the leap in entrepreneurship by connecting them to the right resources. Our goal is really to promote interdisciplinarity. We have key partners in Fribourg, such as the university, Haute École de Gestion, which is the School of Management, the Engineer School, École d'Ingénieurs et d'Architecture, or also the Social Worker School, like Haute École de Travail Social et de Santé, among many others. Our goal is really to connect the students from all these different backgrounds to try to benefit from this large pool of ideas and talents to undertake great projects. You can join us by registering on our website and simply signing up to our newsletter so you can stay up to date with our events and different projects. And today, we're proud to Roman Lehner, a PhD researcher on the topic of micro and nanoplastics, which also happens to be the founder of the NGO called Sail and Explore. Thank you so much for being here, Roman. And now I'll leave the floor to you. And just for the people who are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the chats so Roman can answer them during the short Q&A session right after the presentation. Till then, please don't forget to mute yourself. Thank you, and to you, Roman.
Thanks, Jan, for the introduction. So I'm trying to now share my desktop here. So, can you see it?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so first of all, I have to maybe apologize a bit because it seems that the audience is mainly from AMI, and I was expecting maybe some people who do not have a scientific background. So I will not go very big or deep into science. But anyway, I think if it's a nice opportunity to just present my data that I did at AMI as well as Sail and Explore. So, wait a second. So I will separate the talk into three different topics. I will quickly go into the plastic pollution problem itself. So what is the whole problem all about? What is the background of it? Then I will go more into what my work I did here at AMI. So plastic pollution and human health. And last but not least, I will present the Sail and Explore Association, my NGO I've co-founded 3 years ago with a friend of mine, explaining what we do and what we have done so far and what are our future plans. Okay, so let's start. So the plastic production started in the 50s and increased exponentially within the last 20 years. So, and you can see here, this data is not as new as anymore, but in 2015, the total number of plastics being produced was more than 7 billion tons. In 2019, more than 360 million tons of plastics are being produced. So this is a huge number. If you do look more into detail, in which sector this material is being used, and you can see the packaging is the biggest sector. So, and that makes, I think, for everyone sense, because all these single-use plastics for takeaway products, like all the stuff that you do find in the grocery stores, PET bottles and so on, are included into that. If you do look now on the problem of the ocean pollution, then we can clearly see that the biggest problem on the top is the plastic waste. And what we do see so far is literally just what is on the surface, while there has already been a lot of scientific studies being conducted, which do also focus on the plastic being found on the ground in the ocean, as well as what is floating in between, because not all of the plastic is just staying either on the ground or just sticking on the surface. If we do look on those numbers here, this is a very famous number, these 8 million tons of plastic that are ending up annually in our oceans. So this number is also not very up to date. It's from 2015, and I will then later on go a bit more into detail about that. So what is happening with all the plastic that ends up in our environment? So literally, or most often in the aquatic environment. So the material starts to become brittle due to UV radiation, as well as the salt concentration of the water, for example. So this material starts to become brittle, it breaks down, it's fragments, it's not degraded, it just fragments into smaller sized plastic particles, which are called microplastics. If you do talk about microplastics, by definition, we talk about particles of 1 micron up to 5 millimeter. Microplastics are also separated in 2 different categories. One is primary, one is secondary microplastics. Primary microplastics are industrially produced granules or pellets, which are then further being used to produce whatever kind of a packaging material, for example. And secondary microplastics, which are plastics that do arise through the fragmentation process once bigger sized plastics are in the environment, for example. If we do look on the microplastics, nowadays there are like 5 different categories, nowadays even 6 of them, so how microplastics are being separated. We do have fragments, we have the films, we have the pellets, as already mentioned, we have fibers, but fibers are also now separated into fibers and lines, so fishing net lines, and the foams. A lot of polystyrene-based products are being used for the fishing industry, for example, and also for buoys, for boats. So there is all the foam coming from, literally, and the fragments mainly have a background from whatever kind of material, while films obviously come from cigarette packages or plastic bags and so on. I'm pretty sure that you are all aware about all those pictures. So what is the effect on the environment of microplastics? So there are all these very famous pictures of fish ingesting microplastics. They do get stuck in the gut system. The fish might die. There is even though a study which has shown that small fish have taken up a certain amount of microplastics, which provoked a buoyancy effect for the fish. So the fish was not anymore able to properly dive down and was sticking to the surface and just became a simple prey source. So what you see here on the right, so this is a beach from the Azores. So most of the plastics end up, or a lot of the plastics is ending up on beaches. On the Azores, there are these endemically living birds. There is a study that has been conducted, for example, which has shown that more than 90% of all those birds are consuming those microplastics. So all that the birds had their plastic stock. But next to that, there is also proof already that even smaller size microplastics below 300 microns down to 10 microns in size can be taken up by really small organisms like here this Daphnia maga, which is a bioindicator for the water quality. So several adverse effects have been shown. So next to the entanglement also, for example, of plastic products entangling some animals, like a decrease in food intake, accumulation of hydrophobic organic impurities on the plastics, injury to the gastrointestinal tract, obstruction of water oxygen uptake through the gills, alteration of the expression of genes related to immunity and metabolic processes, behavior changes, and so on. The list is quite long. But the question now is, okay, what about us? So, and with this, we come to the second part of my presentation, where we do have a look on plastic pollution and human health. So, sorry, if we do consider an exposure of us with microplastic, there are literally three possibilities. Either by ingestion, which means that we consume contaminated food sources, like, for example, mussels or contaminated water, salt, beer, sugar. Everything I mentioned here has been proven that microplastics has been found in those products. Why breathing? Because it also has been shown that within the atmosphere, synthetic fibers can be found. Or, for example, via skin contact, as there are different cosmetic products which do contain nano or microplastics. For example, all these scrubbing soaps which have plastic particles inside, which with the idea that the plastic particle itself will scrub your dead skin away. So, but if we do now think about what is the most possible exposure pathway or route for us, then it's definitely ingestion, because we do know from different studies, and I just present here one of them, that, for example, mussels like these bivalves here, bought on a Chinese market. There are also studies out or published which do show that mussels from fish markets from France, for example, and also from Germany, that all those mussels contained plastic particles like fibers or little fragments. I mean, it's not a lot, but it varies a lot depending on the mussel, the size, obviously. But you can see that also the average particle size was about below 250 micrometers. And fibers were, in all of the studies, the most common microplastic particles that has been found. One has to mention, okay, I mean, the problem with, or the thing with the bivalves definitely is we have to think about, okay, where do they grow? Where are they farmed? Is there any industry close by, for example, which might just provoke this stronger pollution of those animals or not? So, I mean, it's definitely not just a common picture that you can find everywhere around the globe. There are also reports and studies that came out within the last 2 years, which showed that microplastic particles have been found in in bottled water and drinking water. But again, if you do look here on the numbers are very low, and this has to be really taken into account. And the point is that for example, with this with the drinking water out of bottled water, one has to consider that when a PET bottle is being produced, there might be in a production process of the PET bottle, there might be some small microplastic particles that are being produced. So at the end of the day, the PET bottle is just filled up with the liquid, the drink, and it contains maybe a bit of plastics. Another study that came out not that long ago, I think it was last year or so, by some Austrian researchers, was the first study which has shown that microplastic particles can also find in stool analysis. So they had different patients, just 8 of them, to be honest, and this is a bit the weak point of this study, but all of them from different countries all around the globe. And they found in all of them particles, as you can see here, between 50 to 500 micrometer. I mean, this is a preliminary study, but it already shows that plastic can also be found in our stool. So the fact is that we do consume microplastic particles. I think that's obvious and not very surprising. But the question still is if the amount of those microplastic particles we do consume can have an adverse effect on our health or not. So we took over this question and we thought about what we could do regarding that. So our idea at AMI was to set up a human 3D intestinal model, which is made out of different cells, which should enable us to expose this model and to get to see if there are any possible adverse effects of microplastics to the human intestinal tract, and specifically maybe also the immune system. So I'm not aware, I don't know how much aware you are about the anatomy of the intestinal tract, but what we do have in the intestine is we have these so-called villi structures, which are important for the movement of the food source. So they all have this movement which they do to move the food through our intestinal tract. So the idea was to have a deeper look on just the epithelial, like the outer cell layer here, these cells are called epithelial cells. So we tried to mimic these in our 3D in vitro model. So what you can see here is we have mimicked this monolayer of cells. I used 2 different cell types, like a cell type which was also secreting the mucus, because all these villi are surrounded by the mucus, which is on one side a biological barrier, but on the other side it also does help the movement of the food through the intestinal tract. On the other side, we introduced immune cells, human immune cells, so-called macrophages and dendritic cells. If you have a look here on the anatomy again, so this is just what it is also, or what can be found in real life. So those immune cells are being found inside of the tissue of the intestinal tract. You might wonder why I point this out. So if you know, for example, would have a look on the lungs. On the lungs, you can find the macrophages on the other side, as there is the contact with the air, and all the bacteria coming in need to be defended or via the macrophages from this side. Okay. So this is kind of like how the model looks like, simplified. So what you can see here in green is this, I use different dyes to stain all my cells. In green, you can see the epithelial cell layer, monolayer, and in blue and red, you can see the macrophages and the dendritic cells. So we had really a nice cell model with a full layer, and with also the immune cells nicely attached on the other side. We also did see that we have a nice expression of the mucus by our mucus secreting cell. And you can even though here also see that we have the brush border here, these small little brushes on the top. And this is an SEM picture from this brush border, so where you can even more nicely see how those microvilli structures look like. So what we did then was we exposed this model to different materials. We tested polyamide, also called nylon, also P6 nylon, which is being used in the textile industry, tire rubber, which is a big topic because all of the cars driving around are producing these little microplastic fragments. Polyurethane, which is a common plastic being used for shoe soles, and polypropylene, which obviously is being used for packaging. So this is the only big scientific data I will present you. So very simple. So what we did was we exposed all these materials to our model, and we checked for toxicity. We couldn't see any toxicity at certain concentrations. And what was more important for us was to see, can these plastic particles provoke any immunological response, like a pro-inflammatory response, and which means, do they start to express, like our immune cells or the epithelial cells, some cytokines, which is a marker molecule for the whole pro-inflammatory process. And to keep it very simple, so we expose these materials for up to 48 hours. And you can nicely see that compared to the positive control and the negative control, that we literally didn't see any effect at all. Okay, so what is the take-home message now from this whole thing? So on one side, okay, we do know, okay, human exposure to plastic is possible. I mean, that's now obvious, but what is missing are still like exact concentrations. They are not known. It's very hard to figure out how much plastic is really like being found in different products, as all the products would have to be tested and so on and so on. That's still like an ongoing. The 3D intestine model that we have set up here in-house is a nice in vitro approach for testing different effects, for example, of microplastics. But the most important thing that I have to point out here is that it really depends on the particles you use and the size, because you don't just have to now get the feeling or the impression like, okay, so microplastics do not provoke anything. Yes, those particles which we have used at our specific sizes did not provoke anything. So, but now what is now relevant? Okay, I mean, for sure, the concentration is relevant. The more of the particles you have, it might provoke something. The form might have of the plastic particles might have an effect, and all the additives which are involved in the plastics. I think it's also very important to mention that, I mean, plastics, all the plastics being produced, they have just a carbon and hydrogen backbone. So it would be in a way kind of like maybe very surprising if you can see an adverse effect, as it is just carbon and hydrogen, as carbon and hydrogen are literally always found in nature everywhere. So there are some studies which are focusing on the additives and have already shown that there is a leaching effect from microplastics of those additives, and those additives might provoke something else. This would be something that should and could be tested in the future. I think the most important thing is really the size, because it's in a way not so surprising that if you consider to have a huge microplastic of, let's say, a millimeter or 500 microns in your intestinal tract, that the cells, which maybe have a diameter in the best case of 20 microns, cannot properly interact with such a huge particle. So therefore, our outcome of our study was not very surprising. So the point is, it's much more interesting than to focus on even smaller size plastics, the so-called nanoplastics. We all do know from biomedicine or from nanotechnology, from what we do here at AMI, that nanoparticles can be spontaneously or actively being taken up by different cell types. And then we do talk about the different business. So what is happening with these nanoplastics? Are there any long-term effects to the tissue, to the cells? Can we see something? And the nanoplastic field is a very young field and nothing has yet really been done so far. So next to our intestinal model, we also started to work on the nanoplastics, because the point is that so far polystyrene beads are just available, which can be used for any further in vitro study, for example. The problem with those polystyrene beads is they're all spherically shaped and they have a fluorophore which is attached to the outside. So if you do use these polystyrene beads at a certain size, you might not even test for the material itself, but if you do see an adverse effect, it might just be because of the fluorophore. So the interesting thing now in the nanoplastic field on one side is, okay, we do need those materials to properly then conduct all the further experiments. So, and to do so, we started to work on this topic, and we came up with two different approaches, a top-down and a bottom-up. The top-down is a milling approach, where we take the material, we incorporate a thermostable dye, a fluorophore, and we just cryomill down the material, and with an additional ball milling step, we do end up with plastics at sizes below 200 nanometers. On the other side, we have a bottom-up approach, which is a nanoprecipitation approach. So we do take the plastics, we dissolve the plastics, and we add our fluorophore and just precipitate by a solvent exchange the material and end up with nanoplastic particles. So we already tested those materials on human cell lines. So on one side, you can see here PET nanoplastics, which are being taken up by the macrophages. So this is a phagocytosing cell line. So they actively eat up the material. It's an immune cell, it's an important cell line. And on the other side, we also tested the uptake by lung cells, human lung cells, and you can see in both cases that it works. So this is still like ongoing work, but very promising. Yeah, okay, and so with this, I come to the last part of my presentation. So my Sail and Explore Association. Yeah, So what is the Sail and Explore Association all about? So first of all, I have to mention that if you go online right now on our website, it will look a bit different. It's not yet properly updated, but we will update the website till the end of the year. And it will look very different as we have changed a bit our mission statement. So we are moving from plastic pollution into a more common marine conservation area, which was at the very beginning also the aim, but since I just started to work on it, the main topic was plastic pollution. So our mission is to commit marine conservation by combining sailing, science, and education in order to find solution and strengthen awareness. So for next year on, we will have two branches. We will have the plastic pollution branch, and we will also have another topic, which will be shark and race. So what is very important for us is we are not just an NGO going outside and maybe just taking plastic samples on the surface and this is it, and we maybe just fill our database with it or just put the stuff somewhere. So for us, it's really important that we push the scientific aspect on one side. And what is very important is that all the data that we produce is being published in a scientific peer-reviewed journal. So far, we already have 2 publications. I will go into that a bit later on, more into detail. So how do we do what is the backbone of our whole association? So we are conducting expeditions, scientific expeditions. We bring people, so-called citizen scientists, on board with us, which is a great thing because they can help us out with the sampling, taking all the samples. They do get a hands-on experience on what it means to do field work. They do see by their eyes what it means to do this work and also how the whole problem looks like. With this, we can push big time the awareness. We always work together with local NGOs and also local scientific institutions and scientists. We bring also local scientists on board. They give also lectures. I by myself and others also give on a daily basis a lecture about the whole microplastic topic, and so on and so on. So these are like our 3 pillars: science, sailing, and education, on how we have constructed the whole NGO. So far we have, so that's like how our association looks like. So we have on top me, the co-founder. We have now Dr. Ornella Weideli, who is joining from next year on. Ornella is a Swiss marine biologist. She's an expert in shark and ray sciences. She's at the very moment in French Polynesia taking over some experiments from Australian scientists, as they are not allowed to fly into French Polynesia. We have a pool of skippers which do help us out to conduct all the expeditions, and we have different scientific collaboration partners which have worked so far with us together. So on one side we have Florian Breider, our newest collaboration partner from the EPFL. We have Dr. Christopher Kim Pham. He's a senior scientist from the Azores. We have 2 scientists from Australia who are helping us out, and we have a collaboration partner from Sicily. So, sorry, these are just, I hope I don't mix things up now. So these are just the people who are literally working with us directly on our expeditions while we go out on a boat. So if we do look on our collaboration partners in general, which we do have, I'm very proud to announce that we got the EPFL on board. This will open us a lot of new opportunities. We so far were collaborating together with the Adolphe Merkle Institute, which helped us a lot to conduct all the research, like the chemical fingerprint analysis of the materials at the very end here in-house, which is very important to see whether we do have the plastics and what kind of plastics. We are super proud to announce that we have the Swiss Youth Science Foundation on board. They are offering from next year on every year to 2 students space on one of our expeditions. We have Schweiz Forst on board, which is a huge citizen, like Swiss-wide, the biggest citizen science consortium. We have the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dorn from Naples on board. They are helping us out with all the expeditions in Italy. And we have the University of Newcastle of an Australian board. EMAR is the institute, the Marine Biological Institute on the Azores. We have 5 gyros on board, which is great, as 5 gyros is like literally the biggest NGO working in this whole topic or on this topic in the field. We now have newly also Clean Sailors, a young NGO from the UK, which we're very proud to collaborate with. They will push big time now more the sailing aspect, like trying to push the awareness and of the sailors to not pollute the oceans with plastic products and so on. And we have a new sailing association from Basel, which will partner up with us within the next hopefully 10 years. So, okay. It's shifted. Okay, anyway, so why do we do what we do? Huh? So this is then the big question. I mean, so the most important thing is that there is not enough data available on a global scale. And now I come back to this number of 8 million tons of plastic, which I presented at the very beginning of my presentation. So the point is that this number is from the year 2015 or even 2010. So it's very old, and it's based literally on exactly what we are doing here on different expeditions. And you can imagine that there are not so many expeditions being conducted, as it is very hard to finance such expeditions on one side. And it's also very time consuming, effort consuming, and so on and so on, you name it. So we really need more accurate data to properly know what is the amount of plastic floating outside. And these 8 million tons of plastic is for sure 3, if not 4 or 5 times way too low. And it has to be much, much higher. So then on the other side, long-term data is missing. So all the expeditions that have been conducted so far, they're just taking like literally a snapshot during a specific time period of maybe a week or 2 in a specific area, and that's it. You can all imagine, I mean, the distribution pattern of microplastics really depends on different conditions or factors, like, for example, the currents, the weather, wind, wave, you name it, you know. So I think it's very tricky to just sometimes announce or publish data stating like this is how it is at the very moment if there is no like comparison data available. So we really, one of our main focuses is to produce now long-term data, as this is really something that is missing. As already mentioned, all the numbers, or not all, but most of the numbers which are available are way too old and not accurate. And for us, what is really important is we want to more properly understand what is the effect of the micro and nanoplastics on the environment. So for us, it's really important. We really want to push the scientific aspect and not just like going out and taking surface water samples. So therefore, we have all these different collaboration partners. So for example, with the people from the Institute of Naples, we will try to set up next year a first expedition where we still take surface water samples of plastics around the Aeolian Islands, so northern Sicily, sorry. But meanwhile, at the very same time, we will have some fishermen joining us, and they will take some proper, they will try to catch fish. The fish that we can mainly find on the plate when you go for a restaurant, for example, and then see is there a correlation, for example, between the plastic that we can find on the surface as well as the plastic that is being taken up by the fish. On the other side, we also try to push now also with the EPFL more the engineering aspect. So we want to come up maybe with some little devices which will allow us already on board to do some analysis, some quick analysis, maybe micro nanoplastics, but this is future music, let's call it. Yeah, and in general, for us, it's super important to push this whole field because it's not yet pushed at all. There is a lot of data missing, and this is where we would like to step in and really give our best and try to make a change. So if you do look on our study grounds so far, which we have, then we can say we have at the moment 3 different study grounds. We have the Mediterranean Sea, we have the Azores, and we have the Great Barrier Reef. On the Mediterranean, these are we conducted here our first 2 expeditions. So this is literally the area between Genoa, Elba, and northern Sardinia, Olbia. I will later on show you some data about this. So this is something which we are now setting up also together with Voss Sailing from Basel. They have constructed their own catamarans, and from next year on we will go out with 2 catamarans at the very same time, collecting the particle or the plastic samples, and this should be ongoing and for the next 7 years to have for the very first time proper data over 10 years to see is there any long-term effect or visible or not on the plastic distribution pattern, for example. On the other side, as already mentioned before, we are setting up in the Mediterranean next year in northern Sicily this study where we want to see the effect if there is any correlation between the plastic found on the surface and the plastic being eaten up by the fish. On the Azores, we conducted the very first expedition last year. This is also a long-term project for the next 8-9 years. And this year we started to work in the Great Barrier Reef. So, I hope this will work. Just a second. Maybe to change here. Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to show you that the video is not very fluid, but whatever. I just show you just quickly how do we do this, the sample collection. So what you can see here is a so-called trawl system. It's an aluminum box with 2 wings here on the side with a certain specific box volume. Attached to that we have a net with a specific mesh size, and in the very back here you can see, maybe hopefully again you're in the lower back, there is a so-called sock which can be removed and where all the plastic particles are being collected. So it's a very simple approach but very efficient. When we do this, you can imagine that the conditions have to be very stable, so we cannot collect samples if we have more than 3 knots of wind. So for those who are not familiar with what 3 knots are, so if you have to, if the waves start to become in white caps, for example, then the conditions are too rough already, because our trawl system will start to bump around on the surface, and this will bias our sample collection. So the whole field studies, all this sampling is really heavily depending on the weather conditions, which makes it even more complicated than if you do set up such an expedition, because you just literally have really to be lucky sometimes to have the proper conditions allowing you to collect everything. Okay, so 2 years ago, there was a report from the World Wildlife Foundation coming out where they had a look on the amount of plastic particles being found in the Mediterranean Sea. And the Mediterranean is considered to be the most polluted sea worldwide, with a record-breaking number of more than 1.2 million microplastic particles per square kilometer. So, and now we come to our work. So what you can see here, so as I already mentioned, we have started in 2018 and redid it in 2019. Obviously this year we had to cancel everything due to COVID, to conduct this study where we went from Genoa down to Elba, down to North Sardinia during June. In 2019, we did the same study during this very same time period to have to check how much plastic we can find, and to have a first comparison study, even though it's quite weak as it is just between 2 years, but just to have an impression of how this looks like. So, but what we have already seen was, and we are now super curious for next year if the pattern is changing or not, that between 2018 up to further to 2019, we have a 9 times higher density of particles that has been found. The average particle concentration, for example, now in 2019 was about 250,000 particles per square kilometer. We had a huge standard deviation. This was due because to the fact that we sometimes had samples with just 1,000 particles, and in one sample here, the big one, the red one, we ended up with more than 3.8 million particles per square kilometer. The predominant polymer types, as you can see, is polyethylene. This is like literally what you can find almost everywhere. Polyethylene is being used for so many different packaging products, for example, which are being trashed into the ocean. So that's why you can find polyethylene as the most predominant polymer type. Yeah. So let's jump to the Azores. I don't know if you guys are aware where the Azores are located. So the Azores are belonging to Portugal. It's an island group of 12 islands. They're really like west of Lisbon. And the very interesting thing about the Azores is that they are located at this very edge of this so-called North Atlantic gyre. So we have all the warm, cold water streams, which are producing this gyre system. And since the Azores are really far away from the mainland, it's a very interesting study ground or study field, because it does show, okay, what is really floating outside there in the North Atlantic gyre. So we went there last year. We did the very first microplastic survey ever. No one has done that before. And we are now just writing up the data. Here you can just see all the study sites where we tried to, where we took our samples. If I maybe go back just for you to let you know. So our plan was to go from Fayal down here to São Miguel and to take as many samples from this whole area. But as already mentioned before, the weather is the limiting factor. And the weather was in the first week really not good. It was raining a lot and we had waves, big waves and so forth. And that's why we couldn't do what we were planning. So we were sticking to this area here. So what we already know is that we have, oh, the number is missing here, I'm sorry, that we have more than 5,000 particles that we have found so far. So we have to do all the calculations, what this means per square kilometer and so on and so on. What is really surprising about the Azores is that there are some beaches on the Azores, like here in Fayal, Western Fayal, which really look like these. So they're stuffed with microplastic particles. You won't imagine that. It's crazy to see. And you have to imagine you're in the middle of the quite far away out somewhere in the Atlantic, and there is this huge amount of microplastics floating around. So for Australia, for this year, that's for us a very important study field. You can imagine, I think everyone from you does know the Great Barrier Reef. I don't think I have to mention here a lot about it. So it's the longer coral reef, the longer and largest coral reef system. It inhabits a huge number of species which do live here and are dependent on it and so on. And there is one a group of islands found in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, which are called the Whitsunday Islands. So it's a collection of 74 islands. And so far there is literally almost no data available about the Great Barrier Reef, which was for our side really surprising to see, as the topic of microplastic or plastic pollution in Australia is super big. But somehow, I don't know why, people have not yet properly started to work on it. And that's why we also now are starting several collaborations with people down under, also Swiss scientists being enrolled in the university, for example, in Queensland, who do help us out to conduct several different surveys. So I don't know who has already been to Australia, so maybe it's not the best picture here, but so this is the northeastern part of Australia. Maybe some people have already heard about Cairns. It's like the biggest city that can be found on the north and east coast. So the Whitsunday Islands are located down here around Early Beach. So what we have done is then we went out and also took our samples as good as it gets, so as it was possible. And so now for the Australian expedition we conducted this year, the aim was not just to, again, just take the standard surface water samples, but we wanted to test the new double net approach. So, because what is very interesting for us is really like the size. So we want to focus also now next to the long-term studies also on the size. So because it's well known that there is a lot of plastics at smaller sized, found in the environment below 300 microns, sorry. And the 300 micron size cutoff is literally what is being used so far. So literally everyone, all NGOs or scientists going out are using this cutoff of 300 microns, but this is still quite big. And we are now really interested in the smaller fractions. So we start to use the double net approach. So behind our normal trawl, we just added a second net. It's very simple, but it's super good because it has to be simple on the boat, because you cannot have a complicated thing. Because the boat is shaking, you need to process, you need to work on the boat and so on. So yeah, so this data is still not ready, but we look forward for next year that we can publish this. Yeah, so, and with this, I'm almost done, sorry. So just want to maybe show you quickly what is the program from next year. So from next year on, from March, April, I'm trying to get back to Australia. It's not yet sure whether this is possible or not, as the borders are closed, but it looks quite promising. That at least for some people, like scientists, that they will open the border and we can go back there. So the idea is then to go more south from the Whitsunday Islands to conduct another expedition down there. In May, June, we have started, or we will start a project in the Engadin in Switzerland. So if people don't know where this is the St. Moritz area. So we will conduct the very first subalpine, worldwide subalpine microplastic study. This is being done with collaboration of the ETH and with ETH students, and I'm really looking forward to that one. We might have even the Swiss TV involved into that, which is quite exciting. In June, as already mentioned, we will head for Italy. We will have our trip to Sardinia. As already mentioned, this trip will be conducted in collaboration with Foss Sailing. And we will just put the focus on the younger generation. So the idea is just to offer to people, kids at the age, or teenagers, or whatever you want to call them, youngsters at the age of 18 up to maybe 25 to join us on that trip. And in June, July, we will head for Sicily. In August, we are on the Azores. This trip is unfortunately already, it's good, but just maybe for you, I don't know. It's to 95% fully booked. We will also have a cameraman on board with us who will make a documentary about the Azores and involving us, our work. In October, we go back to Australia. And in Australia, we have, this will be a bigger project because we will go up to cairns, which I showed before. And the idea is to see if there is any proper barrier effect of the Great Barrier Reef to the distribution pattern of the microplastics. This will be conducted solely with scientists, not with citizen scientists. We also have the Swiss embassy, which is involved into that, which will organize for us a bigger event, hopefully in Sydney. We might, if possible, we want to go for a 1 or 2 day conference together with them, we will see. Yeah, and in November, we start with the second branch of Sail and Explore, which is Shark and Race. So Ornella Weideli will lead those expeditions, and we are planning to go to Egypt. The Shark and Ray expeditions will be very different from the microplastic expeditions, obviously, so there will be no plastic properly involved into that, or plastic science, but it will be a lot about sailing and diving and shark science. And for the future, so we have already for 2022, we have some plans together also with the EPFL. We're trying to head for Okinawa, Japan. We have Cape Verde, which is Western Africa, on our radar. We will go to Brazil, and it looks very promising that we get a steel boat, a 60-foot steel boat, which will allow us to go up to the Arctic. This is from the microplastic side. For the shark and ray side, we will then also set up the Bahamas and the Seychelles. So that's the program for the next 2 years. And with this, I'm at the end of my presentation. I just want to thank again several organizations and institutions. I would like first to point at the Adolphe Merkle Institute, as they allowed me to conduct all the research, like the publication that I presented. The comparison study has literally been done and finished at the Adolphe Merkle Institute together with Barbara Roten. I'm very pleased and happy for that. Looking forward to work together with the Swiss Youth Science Foundation, Foss Sailing, everyone else. I also would like to point out BSF, which I think everyone knows, the company, because they financially supported our 3D in vitro intestinal model study. I'd like to thank also the Swiss National Science Foundation for the financial support, Uni Fribourg, and specifically also you guys from the Innovation Club. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roman, for this great presentation. So we have some questions in the chats. I guess we'll get to it now. The first question is from Roten B. I guess Barbara, is that right? Okay, I guess so. And the question is, do you know how the pandemic situation influenced on one side the plastic pollution and on the other side the use of plastic to pack up food, etc.?
First, no, I think no one has an idea how the pandemic is influencing this whole situation. And the other problem also is, as I already pointed out, I mean, the proper numbers are also not known of how much plastic is floating. So I think it will be very hard to figure this out.
What do you expect, Roman?
What I expect?
Yeah.
I don't know, many people told me that people started to change their behavior of like how they consume products. But to be honest, I don't think that it has a huge impact on the plastic. I mean, it's more about the climate, because people, I think climate is anyway the big environmental topic at the very moment. And I think, I mean, you can look at all of you. I mean, I don't know if you start to just now buy different products in the grocery store or not, and I'm pretty sure no. And regarding the plastic, I'm also not very convinced that this might have happened.
And the second question is, do you think that the consumption of plastic has increased because now we have to pack every little piece we have from a buffet or we buy in a shop? Do you know? Have you any numbers? Did
no, there is
consumption increase?
Obviously nothing out there. I mean,
okay.
how should there something be out there? And I think, yeah, I mean, obviously I think, sure, this might have increased because we do have to package more, like food-wise. Yeah, but I mean, the big question or the big point is also that one has to see, just because the plastic production itself is increasing, it does maybe not mean that the plastic pollution doesn't increase, because if the awareness is increasing, this might interact with each other. And I think the awareness is being pushed big time in the last 15 years. Australia makes huge steps. Europe is also on track. I mean, Italy has abandoned several plastic bags. It's just biodegradable plastic bags. It's a different story then, but whatever. France has jumped on the track. So I mean, it's a global problem, and on a global scale, changes are happening.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
The second question is from Eliav. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can ask a question. I'm curious about, so you're saying that obviously we're well aware of activities that governments and legislation about reducing plastic consumption and using biodegradable materials and trying to ensure that plastic doesn't end up in the oceans. But what is your association doing in terms of advocacy to get the data to the politicians, which can then land in legislation? Do you have an activity that what you're doing is contributing to the reduction of plastic waste?
So far, as on one side, we don't want to get too much involved into politics. That's one side, one aspect. I don't want to mix up science and politics in a big way and being in the sandwich position as an NGO. But obviously, since our aim is to publish our data, we do feed the platforms which can be used by all the others to promote and push this. And we have, like the Clean Sailor Association, for example, another UK-based NGO who is literally trying to push this. So that's what they specifically will do. And I already communicated with them, look guys, we help you out in any way, but I'm not going too far from a political point of view. I mean, there is also an association called the Stop Plastic Pollution Switzerland, which I co-founded 5 years ago, and I left it because I then started my work here at AMI, and I didn't want to mix up science and politics. That's it.
Thank you. The next question is from me. I'm not a science student, so it's more of an economics entrepreneurship question. Why did you choose the NGO model for this project, and how did you find financing? And yeah, you can already answer this question.
The first question is being answered with your second question, the financial situation. So how can you push this field of science and finance it? And for us, the easiest way to finance it is with citizen scientists. So we do have participants who get a package offered on the boat, like with lectures, with meet and greets, and this and that, and blah blah blah, and with the sailing and so on. And they pay a certain price for it, but they are part of it. And those money that allows us to finance all these expeditions. That's why we do that. So that's why we chose this scientific citizen science backbone for it. And for us, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation, because we can big time push the awareness, because literally everyone who joined us on our boat either then started to change its habits on a daily basis, or just started to jump onto something, or within its small community came up with, you name it, a zero waste shop. I don't know what. I mean, it's great. We had journalists on the board. They started to publish it in the newspaper, and I think, for example, if to maybe point this quickly out, if you go to the Mediterranean, most of us maybe have been there. We went there. We have maybe seen some floating plastics, but just bigger macro-sized junk. But if you once go on board and you throw out this troll system, you bring it in. I mean, I showed you one data point with 3.8 million plastic particles per square kilometer. I mean, you will not imagine how much plastic we took out within 30 minutes. I maybe have to point this also. So the troll is just for 30 minutes in the water. And within 30 minutes, you have a huge number of plastic particles, which is crazy to see. So for this, it's for us, this NGO citizen scientist backbone is like the best way of how to push our science. And obviously, yeah, if we do get, and we are now on track on that, to find some proper financial support from the outside, would help us a lot to set everything more up, and push it more.
And my second question is, we hear a lot about social entrepreneurship in business schools nowadays, meaning that we can and must address social, environmental issues with business models. As an entrepreneur, do you believe in this claim, and which role do you think businesses have to play in this kind of issues?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. For sure, it's a good way of how I approach this problem. And it's if you do look what is being done, there are so many different, like either NGOs, smaller companies, startups working on the whole topic. I mean, the number is huge, and you have. I think that's also on the other side a very interesting aspect, because it also does show that there have to be several different ways of how to approach this global problem. There is not just one single solution, and so therefore I think this entrepreneurship has a huge impact on it. And I mean, the best example I think is Bojan Slat, this young Dutch guy who was at the age of 19 when he gave a TEDx talk 5 years ago, raising 2 million Swiss francs in half a day, and has now set up the ocean cleanup as a company. Based in the Netherlands, where maybe you guys know about it, where he came up with this tubing system. It's literally the same principle as if you have oil spills in the water and you want to get rid of it. You put a plastic tubing or a tubing system onto the water surface, it floats, it's not sinking, and since the oil is also floating, you hinder the oil to just like moving around, and you can easily collect it. So that there's literally the same background, and I think there is a huge potential to tackle this problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't know if you have any more questions.
I also had a question.
Yeah, of course.
So I guess 90% of the ocean plastics come from 8 or 10 rivers, 8 of which are in Asia and 2 are in Africa. I was wondering how you work on awareness, or if you looked at working on awareness for, I guess, Asia and Africa, for where most of these plastics are coming from in the world.
If we do, we'll focus on that, or what?
Yeah, if you've done anything to increase awareness from the sources of like the majority of the plastic.
I was involved 6 years ago in a project called Expedition Plastic. You can go on YouTube and look at it.
Okay.
Don't be afraid. The hairs were still long, but I had a bit more beard. And the cappy was red and not white, and not labeled with Sail and Explore. No, you can go on YouTube and see this video documentary thing. Short videos of 4 minutes. So the idea was, so we went to Indonesia, we went to Bali. We met local people who do work on the topic, also European people who moved to Bali, and they approach it from a social aspect. So they try to come up with a new approach of, okay, how can I change within the Balinese community the habits of how to consume the plastic products, for example, because they have a very different feeling for plastic. For them, plastic, they don't see the pollution in the plastic. I mean, some of them can, I don't know how high the percentages of people who cannot even swim, they're afraid of the water, so they go anyway, go not in there, and plastic doesn't stink, so there is not a big problem with that, and that's it. Huh? So they just forget about it. Just maybe to go a bit more back to your question, so I did that, so you can see that, what we have done there, and we pushed and so all this Expedition Plastic was not just advertised in Switzerland, but also within Europe. I got a big feedback on that. I even though got approached by a Swiss guy who wanted, together with me, set up a huge project in Thailand to collect the plastic. I said, sorry, no time for that, honestly. But we are planning also within the next years to go to Indonesia, specifically to the Celebes Sea, which is east of, between Borneo and Papua New Guinea. And we try to maybe set something up there. But our focus still will be, and for the future, science. So we will push awareness, but that's why we mainly do work together with local NGOs, because we help them to, for example, set up little exhibitions, or events, or you name it. So literally like what we are planning for next year in Australia with the Swiss Embassy. So I got in touch with the Swiss Embassy, and they're super interested to set up a huge event with us in October, November. And the idea is really to involve all the big NGOs from Australia. And we do talk about NGOs with Instagram followers of 120,000, you know. So it's really big. And the plan really is then to maybe set up one big event where we on one specific day bring all the people to the East Coast and they do one big beach club, something like that. So that's how we try to involve ourselves into it. But no, we are, as I said, I mean, science is our backbone. I'm more interested in the scientific part. So that's why I also want to, for example, with the EPFL now, really push the science field more with this engineering aspect, as they have something in the pipeline, stuff like that. That's really like what we want to do. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'll definitely check out that video.
Do that.
We have another question from Guillaume Chenot. I would like to know if there are opportunities for students to join your expeditions with lower fees by being more involved in the crew, organization, or if you thought about involving students in other ways.
So first of all, everyone can join. Huh? Also professors are allowed to join. Now everyone can join, yes. So the point is that I already pointed this out, that next year for our trip to Sardinia together with Foss Sailing Basel, we will just bring the younger generation on board. So age 18 or even younger up to 25. My biggest concern is that people need to know how to swim. Huh? So that's it. I mean, otherwise, I don't need anyone falling from the boat and then I have to jump behind or whatever. The point is, for this expedition, as the price can be quite expensive for this clientele, we are right now in a discussion with 2-3 organizations in Switzerland who specifically are focusing on financially supporting NGOs like us to allow those participants at this specific age to get a reduction on the price. So we're aiming to get 50% on the price, but that's why we also then just bring those youngsters on the boat. So, but this is a big concern from us, from our side. It's also the important thing, our background with Foss Sailing. Because Foss Sailing, what they literally did was they constructed their 2 catamarans by themselves as a youth science project. And they're just pushing the younger generation, so bringing the youngsters into sailing and stuff like that. And we are now combining together with them everything, so we get there, or they bring us the audience, and we can push the awareness and also the science. So yeah.
I was wondering, so there is no requirement from people who come on the expeditions apart from knowing how to swim, if I understood.
Yes.
Okay.
And
great.
don't be afraid if you think you get seasick. I can promise you, so far no one got seasick who joined us. And if so, people throwed up because of the beer, the amount of beer they were drinking, but not because they got just seasick. I mean, if they were listening to us, and the most important thing is like what you eat. And yeah, we once had a guy joining us, and you know, the price you pay with us is all inclusive, so you can eat as much as you want. He asked me why I'm just eating a banana in the morning. I said, yeah, you will see. I will not eat a salami, an orange juice, go for a yogurt, and like 10 different things. 1 hour later, fish feeding, whatever. But normally, no one gets seasick. And if so, you don't feel well, then we see it. We can sense the people, the participants. We know what we have to do. And so this should not be a reason not to join us.
Great. So if you have any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself. But there's no more questions on the chat. So I guess that's it. So thank you so much for the presentation, Roman.
Welcome.
And feel free to check out the website and join. Do you have a newsletter or something?
Just one thing to say, the website will be updated till the end of the year. If you go now online, you will see the old version, you will see the expedition to the Azores, but wait maybe until next year, go online, and then you will see all the stuff we will do for next year.
Amazing. So we have someone who already went on an expedition, I guess, Livius Muff. Is that right?
Livius Muff is a scientist, a PhD student from the Adolphe Merkle Institute, and he joined last year on one of the expeditions, and I hope that he will join also next year or so for another one.
Awesome. So we have someone recommending 10 over 10 the expedition. So I guess everyone's joining next year. Great.
Hope so. You guys all on board, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Roman. And thank you everyone for being here, and feel free to join Innovation Club for our next events and Sail and Explore to explore. Thank you so much and have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.